Today's story is so emotionally powerful, it might leave you breathless. Set against the vast and restless American frontier, where dust hangs in the air and the horizon stretches wider than a person's courage. It's a place where strength and silence collide, where survival depends on how small or how brave you're willing to be. It began with something simple. A bell ringing above the door of a quiet seamstress shop. An ordinary sound that would unravel years of fear and force one woman to confront the truth about herself. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Briar Hale had never been more than a slip of a woman, barely 5 feet tall in her stockings, all fine bones and narrow shoulders, with a build that made strangers guess she was younger than her 26 years. Her hands were small enough to disappear inside a man's palm. Her boots were always the smallest pair on any shelf. A man could circle her waist with both hands and still have space left between his fingers. She had entered this world slight and had stayed that way, no matter how Lenore Shaw had tried to feed strength into her as a child. In time, Briar came to believe her size was as fixed and unchangeable as the shade of her eyes or the fall of her hair. But the truth of her smallness ran deeper than flesh and bone. The rest had been carved into her by years of living under a roof ruled by Gideon Vale. He had been a big man in every way that mattered. Broad through the shoulders, yes, but broader still in temper. His moods filled every corner of a room. His anger pressed against the walls until the whole house felt dim and airless. He never struck Briar. He never needed to. His voice alone could make her shrink in on herself, could make her feel as though she were folding inward, thinning, fading, until she was little more than a shadow against the wall. She learned early that safety lived outside his notice. If she moved quietly enough, if she spoke softly enough, if she made herself slight and forgettable, the storms in him might roll past without breaking over her head. Lenore Shaw reinforced those lessons, not with harshness, but with example. Lenore had survived Gideon by yielding space, by lowering her eyes, by smoothing every sharp edge of herself until there was nothing left that might provoke him. She taught Briar to keep her voice low, her footsteps light, her presence modest. She taught her that survival meant vanishing. When Gideon finally died, rage still stamped on his purpled face. Briar felt grief twisted together with relief. Sorrow tangled with a strange, guilty freedom. But habits built over a lifetime do not fall away like old clothes. She carried her careful smallness into womanhood and into a marriage that seemed safe precisely because it demanded so little. Alden Shaw was a modest man in every sense. Modest height, modest ambition, modest desire. He clerked at a mercantile and lived as if he were penciled lightly into the margins of his own life. He never raised his hand, never raised his voice. He treated Briar with a polite distance she mistook for kindness. Their marriage was quiet and tidy, built on routine instead of fire. Alden never frightened her, but he never truly saw her either. He accepted her silence the way a man accepts the weather, without question. Even their marriage bed reflected that stillness Saturday nights, regular as clockwork. He approached her with the same dutiful efficiency he brought to balancing ledgers, then retreated to his own room without tenderness, without lingering. Briar endured it calmly, even gratefully. It was brief, it was predictable, it was safe. She told herself that was what marriage meant, that the wild passion written in dime novels belonged to fiction. Real life, she believed, was made of obligation and steady compromise. When Alden died of consumption 3 years later, coughing his life out into linens that smelled of sickness and fading hope, Briar mourned him honestly, but not with devastation. She lost a companion, not a great love. She lost routine, not longing. As the weeks passed and the sharp edge of grief dulled, she understood something unsettling. She did not want that life returned to her. She wanted something unnamed, something larger than safety, something waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. So she went west. An advertisement for a seamstress position in the New Mexico territory became her excuse to leave everything behind. The journey was grueling. Dust, rattling wagons, endless sky. But with each mile she felt a strange strengthening in her bones. Copper Creek greeted her as a modest sprawl of buildings gathered along a single dusty street, clinging together against the wide, empty desert. The shop she stepped into was narrow and plain. Bolts of fabric stacked in the window, a brass bell above the door. To anyone else, it was forgettable. To Briar, it felt like possibility. Ruth Bellamy, the aging widow who owned it, was ready to retire and willing to teach Briar the trade, with the understanding that one day the place would be hers. Briar rented a small room above the shop. She built routines that felt steady and predictable. Her life became neat and orderly again, quiet, controlled, asking nothing of her except continued smallness. She told herself she was content. She told herself surviving was enough. Then one afternoon, the bell over the door rang, and everything she thought she understood about herself began to split open. She glanced up expecting Elspeth Rowan or young Maris Dunn, ordinary customers with ordinary needs. Instead, the doorway filled with a man who had to duck beneath the frame. The air shifted when he entered, heavy and electric. He seemed less like a man and more like a force of nature stepping indoors. Kainoa stood there, towering well over 6 feet, perhaps closer to 6.5. But it was not merely height that stunned her. It was the breadth of him, shoulders wide as a barn beam, chest thick beneath worn cotton, arms corded with muscle that moved beneath sun-browned skin. His hands looked capable of splitting firewood without an axe. His boots alone seemed larger than her forearms. He filled the room. It wasn't only his height that unsettled her. It was the sheer weight of him, the solid breadth that seemed too large for the narrow walls of Ruth Bellamy's shop. His shoulders nearly stretched from one rack of fabric to the other. The worn cotton of his shirt pulled tight across his chest, outlining muscle built by labor and long miles. His arms were thick, powerful, the movement beneath his sun-warmed skin visible even when he stood still. His hands drew her eye next. Each one could have swallowed both of hers whole. The fingers looked strong enough to split stone or twist iron without effort. His thighs were solid as fence posts, calves cut like carved timber. And his boots, Lord, those boots, massive, planted squarely on her wooden floor as though some ancient mountain had chosen to stand upright and walk inside. He was Apache. She could see it now. The fall of long black hair past his shoulders, the proud line of his cheekbones, the steady darkness of his eyes. The late afternoon sun caught the copper of his skin and made it glow. He wore buckskin leggings beneath his shirt, a beaded belt at his waist, boots clearly crafted for a man no ordinary cobbler could size. Briar Hale's first instinct was the one she had known since childhood: shrink. Her shoulders folded inward, her chin dipped, her gaze fell to the floorboards. Every lesson Gideon Vale had carved into her came rushing back. Stay small, stay quiet, do not draw attention. She felt herself narrowing, trying to take up less air. "I'm looking for the seamstress," he said. His voice rolled low and steady, deep enough that she felt it in her ribs before she fully heard it. "I was told she works here." "I'm the seamstress," Briar answered, barely lifting her eyes. "How can I help you?" "I need a shirt," he said plainly. "Mine's torn beyond mending. Most ready-made clothes aren't built for a man my size." That she could plainly see. She dared a glance upward and found him studying her, not with threat, but with quiet observation. His eyes took in her narrow frame, her bowed posture. Heat rose to her cheeks, and she looked away again. "I can make one," she said quickly. "I'll need your measurements." The measuring proved to be something she would never forget. She dragged a stool across the floor and climbed onto it just to reach his shoulders. The tape measure stretched to its limit around his chest. She had to estimate beyond its markings. She circled his waist, his arms, standing so close she could feel the warmth radiating from him. He smelled of sage, smoke, leather, and open country. Something untamed and clean that sent her pulse racing against her will. Her hands shook as she worked. She kept her eyes fixed on numbers, on fabric, on anything but him. She had never stood so near someone so overwhelmingly large, never felt so keenly aware of her own slightness. He remained still as stone. He moved only when she asked. He answered questions simply. He never commented on her trembling hands. He did nothing that could be mistaken for threat. He simply stood there, immense, patient, unexpectedly gentle. When she finished, he inclined his head. "Thank you," he said. "I'll return in a week." She named a price far lower than she should have. Her mind was too flustered to reckon properly. He didn't haggle. He placed silver coins on the counter with those great hands and stepped back out into the sun. Briar sat alone in the quiet shop long after the door shut. Her heart pounded. Her thoughts tangled. She told herself she was frightened. But deep down, she knew fear wasn't the whole truth. She had been captivated. Something about him pulled at her. Some gravity she couldn't name. She had wanted to look at him, truly look, even while every instinct warned her to lower her eyes. She felt something stirring inside her that unsettled her more than his size ever could. A week later, Kainoa returned. She had labored over that shirt like a woman trying to solve a riddle. 3 failed attempts lay folded beneath her work table before she understood how to shape fabric for a body like his. When he stepped behind the curtain to try it on, she stood outside gripping her hands together. When he emerged, her breath caught. The shirt fit as though cut from memory. It followed the breadth of his shoulders and narrowed cleanly at his waist. The cloth stretched slightly over his chest, outlining strength rather than hiding it. He looked magnificent. The thought flashed through her mind before she shoved it away. "This is fine work," Kainoa said, examining the seams with surprising care. "You've got real skill." "Thank you," Briar murmured, staring at the floor. "My name is Kainoa," he added. "I didn't give it last time." "I'm Briar," she said softly. "Briar Hale." "Briar," he repeated, and the sound of her name in his deep voice seemed heavier somehow, more grounded. "I'll tell others about your work. Many of my people need proper clothing. Few hands can shape it like this." He kept his word. In the weeks that followed, more Apache men and women stepped into her shop. Quiet, respectful, seeking shirts, mending, skirts, coats. They said Kainoa had sent them. They spoke of the small seamstress who could tailor cloth to fit even the broadest shoulders. And every time the bell over the door rang, Briar found herself wondering if it would be him again. Briar welcomed the steady flow of new customers. The Apache men and women who stepped through her door forced her to rethink patterns, to widen sleeves, to reinforce seams, to cut fabric in ways she had never been taught. The work challenged her hands and sharpened her skill. Yet beneath that honest satisfaction ran another current. She found herself listening for Kainoa's stride outside the shop, her pulse quickening each time the bell rang and his towering form filled the doorway. He came often, too often to be explained by torn seams or worn collars. He brought shirts that needed only minor stitching, ordered things no man truly required, and lingered long after business was finished. Their conversations stretched longer with each visit, drifting from small talk into something deeper, something personal. He asked about her childhood, about Gideon Vale and the heavy silence of that house, about Lenore Shaw and the lessons of shrinking small enough to survive, about Alden Shaw, the safe husband who had never demanded more than she was willing to give. Against every instinct honed in her bones, Briar answered him. She spoke of coming west, of wanting more than safety, of hoping to become someone different in a place where no one knew her past. Words she had never trusted to another soul slipped free when she stood across from him. Doors she had sealed shut for years opened without force. And he listened. He listened as if what she said mattered, as if she mattered. There was no impatience in him, no judgment. Only a steady attention that made her feel, for the first time in her life, fully visible. In return, Kainoa spoke of his own road. He had once been a warrior. He did not share details of the battles, but the scars on his arms and the quiet weight in his eyes told their own story. He had buried kin, watched sickness sweep through his people, watched land shrink beneath white claim stakes and reservation lines. He had learned to survive because survival was the only thing left within reach. Now he stood between worlds, never entirely at home in either. One storm-heavy afternoon, rain striking hard against the shop windows, he studied her across the work table. "You know what it is to be alone," Kainoa said quietly. "I can see it in the way you stand apart. You watch from the edges. Even in a crowded room, you're somewhere else." Briar's fingers stilled over her sewing. "Yes," she admitted. "It felt safer that way. Safer to be small. Safer not to be noticed." "You're not invisible," he replied, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Not to me. You never were." Heat climbed into her cheeks. She looked away at once, heart pounding as if she had been caught doing something forbidden. Being seen felt dangerous, almost unbearable. Yet beneath that fear, something shifted. A crack in the walls she had built brick by careful brick. He saw her, not as something fragile or forgettable, but as something worth studying. And there was no threat in his gaze, no command, nothing like the storm that had lived in Gideon Vale's eyes. Kainoa looked at her with something softer, something that might have been admiration. Weeks turned into months. The thread between them tightened. She found herself thinking of him when she should have been measuring hems, listening for his footsteps when she should have been counting stitches. Her work faltered on days he did not come. On days he did, something warm unfurled inside her chest the moment he crossed the threshold. She began to imagine what it might feel like to be held in his arms. Those immense arms that could split timber yet handled silk as though it were fragile glass. She imagined leaning against his chest, hearing the steady rhythm of his heart. She imagined his hands at her waist, careful and sure, but always, the thought collided with reality. He was so large, she was so small. When she stood beside him, her head barely reached the center of his chest. To meet his eyes, she had to tilt her chin high until her neck ached. The difference between them felt impossible to ignore. How could she exist beside someone so vast? How could she trust herself to a man who could break her without meaning to? His body seemed built for strength. Hers seemed shaped for retreat. The questions haunted her at night. They chased sleep from her bed and silenced any attempt to name what she felt. Then came the evening that changed everything. The sky burned orange and rose as the sun sank low over Copper Creek. Kainoa lingered in the shop longer than usual. They spoke easily, comfortably, but the air felt different, charged, as if the moment itself held its breath. He stepped closer, close enough that she felt the warmth of him, close enough that his shadow draped over her shoulders. She stared at the familiar fabric of the shirt she had sewn months ago, now softened by wear. She could not lift her gaze any higher. "Briar," he said softly. His voice had never sounded so gentle. She could not answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floorboards, on the space between his boots and her smaller ones, on the undeniable proof of how mismatched they were. He stood near enough that the air between them seemed to narrow, and Briar felt every lesson of smallness pressing back against her ribs, urging her to shrink once more. "You're enormous," Briar breathed before she could stop herself. The words slipped out raw and unguarded, months of silent fear breaking free all at once. "You're so big," she went on, her voice trembling. "You fill the whole room. Sometimes it feels like you fill the whole world. And beside you, I'm nothing. I'm a speck, a shadow, something that could disappear if you exhaled too hard." Tears stung her eyes. Her shoulders curled inward on instinct. The old reflex returned. Make yourself smaller, safer, unseen. Then she felt his hand at her chin. At first, she barely registered the touch. His fingers were large against her face, his palm warm along her jaw. But the pressure was light. So light it felt like a question rather than a command. Slowly, carefully, he tipped her face upward. He gave her every chance to step back. She didn't. Her gaze traveled unwillingly up the solid plane of his chest, along the column of his throat, past the strong line of his jaw, until her eyes finally met his. "Look at me," Kainoa said softly. "Not the floor, not my boots, not my size. Look at me, Briar." She did. She looked into those dark eyes that had watched her for months, had seen her when she tried so hard not to be seen. What she found there stole the air from her lungs. There was patience in him, tenderness, a quiet hunger that matched her own, a love waiting, steady and restrained, until she was ready to meet it. "I can't help it," she whispered, tears sliding freely now. "You're so large. I've spent my whole life trying to be small. When I stand near you, I feel like I might vanish. I don't know how to exist beside someone like you. I don't know how to be anything but invisible." His thumb brushed along her cheek, wiping away tears with a gentleness that made her shiver. "You think my size means I'll swallow you up," he said. "You think because I take up space, there won't be any left for you." He shook his head slightly. "That's not how it works, Briar. Me being big doesn't make you small. You're not invisible to me. You never were. The first day I walked through that door, you were the brightest thing in the room. But I feel small," she said brokenly. "I feel like I'm nothing." "That feeling is lying to you," Kainoa replied. "You are not nothing. You're the reason I find excuses to come back here week after week. You're the face I see when I close my eyes at night. You're the voice that follows me when I ride alone. You say you're small, but you've taken up more room in my heart than anyone I've ever known." His other hand rose, cradling her face fully between his palms. She should have felt trapped. Instead, she felt treasured. "I've been this size my whole life," he continued. "I've watched people shrink when I step near. I've seen fear before I've said a word. I learned to move slow, speak soft, not because I'm weak, but because I never wanted my strength to frighten anyone." He leaned closer, lowering himself so she wouldn't have to strain. "I don't want to overpower you, Briar. I want to guard you. Not because you're fragile, because you matter. My size isn't a threat. It's shelter. I want to be the place where you feel safe enough to stop shrinking. I want to hold you while you learn how to take up space." Her whole body trembled now, not from fear, but from the weight of choice pressing against her ribs. She could step back. She could retreat into the careful shell she had lived inside for 26 years. Or she could lift her eyes and trust what she saw there. Not muscle, not height, but heart. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "What I feel for you, it's too much. I don't know how to hold something this big." "Then don't hold it back," he said quietly. "Let it be big. Let it fill you. Love isn't meant to make you smaller, Briar. It's meant to make you grow." He bent down further, folding that immense frame until his face was inches from hers. "I'm going to kiss you," he murmured. "But only if you want it. Only if you choose it. I won't take anything you don't offer." She looked up at him. This mountain of a man who asked permission like it was sacred. Something inside her gave way. "Yes," she whispered. "I want you to." He kissed her, not fiercely, not hungrily. His lips were warm and careful, soft against hers. He didn't crush her into his chest. He didn't overwhelm her with strength. His hand stayed steady at her face, his body angled so she never felt caged. It was the gentlest kiss she had ever known, and the strongest. There was no ownership in it. No demand, only promise. Protection without possession. Love without pressure. When he finally drew back, her breath came in shallow waves, tears still clinging to her lashes. But these were not tears of fear. They were relief. For the first time in her life, Briar Hale felt seen. And instead of disappearing beneath his sighs, she felt herself beginning to grow. When the kiss finally broke, Briar realized tears were still sliding down her cheeks. But they no longer tasted of fear. They were born of release, of relief, of the dizzying wonder of being truly seen. "You are not invisible," Kainoa murmured again, resting his forehead gently against hers. "You are not nothing. You are everything, Briar. You are exactly right for me." A breathless laugh escaped her, shaky and bright. "Right for you? How can that be? You're a mountain, Kainoa. I'm hardly more than a pebble." "Mountains need pebbles," he answered, warmth threading through his voice. "Without the small things, the big ones lose their meaning. Without something delicate, strength has nothing to guard. You fit with me, Briar. Perfectly." She swallowed, her heart swelling. "Your size isn't a flaw," he added. "It's a gift I intend to cherish for the rest of my life." In the weeks that followed, Briar began to understand what it meant to love a man whose body dwarfed her own. It was not something to conquer, but something to learn. They adjusted to one another slowly, discovering new ways to move, to stand, to rest side by side. The difference in their height and build did not vanish, but it ceased to frighten her. It became simply part of them. When Kainoa wrapped his arms around her, she did not feel overwhelmed. She felt sheltered. Those powerful arms that could have broken her instead held her with careful restraint, as though she were something precious. When she leaned her ear against his chest, she heard the steady beat of his heart, deep and sure, like distant thunder rolling across open plains. That rhythm steadied her in a way nothing ever had before. Strangely, his vastness did not make her smaller. It made her feel expanded, as though loving someone so immense stretched her capacity for joy, for feeling, for life itself. Their closeness unfolded gradually. Briar set the pace, and Kainoa followed without hesitation. He seemed to understand without explanation that her body had long been trained for endurance rather than delight. He gave her time. He gave her space. When she pulled back, he did not press. When she stepped forward, he met her. Little by little, trust deepened. The first time she saw him without clothing, she drew in a sharp breath and turned away, startled by the full reality of him. Every inch of him carried the same scale, strong, imposing. For a fleeting moment, old fears surged again. But Kainoa did not laugh. He did not demand her gaze. He waited. "Look at me," he said gently. "Not at anything else. Look at my face, Briar. See me." She lifted her eyes slowly and found only patience there. No judgment, no pride, only love. And she understood that her fear was not truly about his body. It was about her own hunger, about wanting something so deeply it frightened her. "I want you," she whispered, surprised by the boldness of her own voice. "And it scares me. I've never wanted anything this much. I don't know how to hold a feeling this big." "Then don't try to hold it down," Kainoa said softly. "Let it be big. Let it make you brave. You don't have to contain it." That night, and in the nights that followed, he showed her that pleasure was not something to endure, but something to welcome. He showed her that her small frame held depths of sensation she had never known, that their difference in size was not a barrier, only a detail, something to navigate with care and tenderness. She had expected to feel crushed beneath him. Instead, she felt secure, guarded, chosen. They were married beneath open sky in a modest ceremony that wove together pieces of both their worlds. Briar stood on a wooden crate so she could meet his eyes during their vows. And a few guests, among them Calder Wynn, smiled at the sight of the towering groom and his slight bride, Mountain and Wildflower. When Kainoa lifted her after the ceremony, holding her easily against his chest as though she weighed nothing at all, tears blurred her vision again. She was small. She would always be small. But in his arms, she did not feel diminished. She felt treasured. She felt safe. She felt, at last, that she had found her place. Their wedding night held both her fears and her hopes. Kainoa's patience never wavered. He tended to her comfort with unwavering focus. He showed her that their bodies could align, that the space between them could close without harm, that she could welcome him fully, not because she was overpowered, but because she chose to. And when they finally came together completely, when she felt the fullness of him and the unmistakable rightness of it, something inside her settled. She had been wrong all along. Her smallness was not weakness. His largeness was not danger. Together they forged something neither could have created alone. A union that reached beyond height or strength and touched something enduring, something unbreakable. In loving him, Briar Hale did not disappear. She became whole. What they forged that night felt enduring, something that would outlast time and rumor alike. Briar cried out, raw, unguarded sounds she had never allowed herself before, the echo of years of restraint breaking loose at last. Kainoa held her through every trembling breath. His vast frame curved protectively around her smaller one, his powerful hands steady and careful, his low voice brushing against her ear with words she would carry the rest of her life. "You are not invisible," he whispered as she lay against him, still shaking from the rush of it. "You are not nothing. You are the center of my world, Briar. You are the rhythm in my chest. You are the air I draw. You are everything." In the years that followed, they built a life that unsettled expectations on both sides of the frontier. A white woman and an Apache man. A towering presence and a slight figure walking side by side. Some people stared, some murmured, Some could not look beyond the contrast. His height, her smallness, his heritage, her own. But Briar no longer bent beneath the weight of other people's judgments. She had spent too many years shrinking for the comfort of others. Kainoa had shown her that safety was not found in vanishing. It was found in being recognized. He had taught her that real love does not press you down. It draws you upward. The right man does not overshadow you. He makes space for you. She still needed a wooden crate when she wanted to kiss him, eye to eye. She still had to tip her chin high until her neck protested when she studied his face. She still looked slight beside him when they walked through Copper Creek together. But those differences no longer frightened her. They became part of their landscape, like mountains and rivers. Features to move through, not barriers to overcome. And whenever old habits stirred, whenever she felt her shoulders begin to fold inward, whenever her gaze drifted toward the ground, Kainoa would rest a finger beneath her chin and lift it gently. "Look at me," he would say. "Not at your doubts, not at your fears. Look at me." And when she did, she saw herself reflected in his eyes. Not small, not fragile, not lesser, magnificent. She had once feared his size would swallow her whole. Instead, it gave her space to stretch into the woman she was meant to be. She had once believed his presence would erase her. Instead, it taught her how to stand in the light. She had once thought safety meant being small. He showed her that the safest place in the world was in his arms. "You're huge," she had whispered once, afraid to meet his gaze. He had lifted her chin and answered without words, teaching her to look not at his height, but at his heart. And inside that love, Briar Hale found a home broader than any horizon she had ever known. Wide enough to hold every part of her, even the parts she had hidden for 26 years, especially those. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice, imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.